The knowledge of time, the knowledge of the future, what Korzybski calls man's time-binding ability, is an advantage for which we pay a very serious price. To know the future in a conscious way gives you, obviously, a survival advantage. But at the same time, it gives you a survival disadvantage. So that what you gain on the roundabout, you lose on the swings. You gain the ability to plan your future, say to invest, to take out insurance, to do all those things that are called provident. But the price you pay for it is anxiety. And you pay this price because you know that you don't know enough. That you know, as it were, enough about the future to try to be provident, but you don't know enough about the future to be sure that your providence was correctly done. Therefore you worry. Therefore you are concerned with what will happen tomorrow. And it's so extraordinary that passage in the St. Matthew's Gospel where Jesus says, don't make any anxiety about the morrow, what you're going to eat, what you're going to drink. And I'm amazed about that, because every minister I have ever heard discuss this passage says it can't be put into practice. It's that the church simply never did teach that. That's the most subversive passage in the Gospels, which is swept under the carpet. They say, oh, it's impossible. We cannot give up making plans. We cannot give up prediction. Of course, we predict in a way, in a sort of unconscious fashion. The simplest act involves a kind of prediction. So in this case, we are simultaneously aware of things which, if you do regard the present as a hairline, would be called past and future at once. But if you're not hung up on the idea that the present is this hairline thing, which is purely abstract, then you have no problem in accepting the idea that we are simultaneously aware of past events and future events. Just like you're watching from a traveling vehicle, and you can see where you're going to be, and you can see where you have been from where you are now. So then, the question then becomes, we predict those far futures which are not within our present vision by calculation. But so then, when you start calculating and you resort to prediction, you are now trying to get hold of all this. But many people have an instinctive feeling, say when confronted with a great astrologer who could tell them all the future, I don't want to hear it. I'd rather not. And this is in a way a wise, if uninformed, reaction. Another point of view would be a realistic person saying, the trouble with you is you don't want to know your future because you're afraid of life. If you would know your future, you could take practical steps to adapt things to it. It's like all technology is initially a success. But the real problem finally comes to is this. When the outcome of a game is known, the game is cancelled. Because the whole point of playing the game is that we don't know the outcome. Because the known future is already past. And the higher the degree of certainty of knowledge as to the future, to that extent it has happened. You've had it. And we don't want to put the future in that situation. Not really. If you think of the cosmos as basically a game of hide and seek, where the Lord God is creating the universe by forgetting that he's God and imagining that he's you, this is the fundamental way of getting rid of the eternal boredom of knowing all about it, and of there being no surprises. The whole vitality of being alive is that it is always surprising. To be enlightened is to be surprised at everything, that it is a wonder, that everything is a miracle, that it is highly improbable, and really shouldn't have happened at all. But there it is. If there isn't that sense, there is no vitality in anything. But again, of course, we have the problem that I discussed yesterday in another form, the problem of order and randomness, and the drawing the line, you see, where to draw the line between order and randomness. So in the same way, where to draw the line between the known and the unknown. How much to predict. If you go into this beyond a certain point, the process cancels itself out because it's no longer worth doing. Look at a group of tourists. I take people to Japan every so often, and the Japanese are absolutely weird about this. Wherever you go, the tourists, the Japanese, everybody, they carry cameras. And it's very nice to have a camera, and photography is a fine art, yes. But there's a certain kind of people who never look at anything except with a camera. They go around capturing reality in this box. And there was one man who was a magnificent photographer who came along with me, who never did anything but photograph. And he was always late and dawdling behind the other people, even though we moved at a very leisurely pace, because he was interminably photographing, capturing the world, stopping it, making a still, see, with this box. So the clutch box you go around with, as a result, I find that people do not relate to the environment. Also, when people have very good times, they have a picnic at the beach, and it's delightful. Somebody says, oh, someone should have brought a camera to prove that this really did happen. But what happens instead nowadays, when somebody gives a great party, and all sorts of people are invited, they are sure that the society reporter comes from the press. Then they can read about it in the paper the next day and look back and say, now that really did happen, it's in the papers. Well, the same way, a young adolescent who feels that he doesn't really exist commits a crime in order to get his name in the papers. There he'll be headlined as a great hero and villain, and he'll know he's there. He'll be recognized. So it's the same principle, all along, of allowing the recorder, which translates life into a system of symbols, to predict the future for us. Then it makes us anxious. You see how the vicious circle operates? And having made us anxious, we turn back to it and say, you solve this problem. We don't want to be anxious. We want a foolproof system. All right, back to the recorder. Back to a closer study of the symbols. How can we outwit the future? It's a complete vicious circle. The more it succeeds, the more it fails. The more you are quite sure where you're going, and that the plane won't crash under any circumstances. Well, by the time you can travel from here to anywhere in the world in an absolutely assured won't crash plane, I tell you, there will be no point in taking the journey. Because the place you will go to will be the same place you started from. At least it will look exactly like it. And furthermore, that journey in the completely foolproof plane, because it is absolutely planned, you will have already taken it. That's why the place you are going to will be identically the place you came from. There has to be the risk in it for there to be any point in taking it. It's a curious thing about human beings. We keep trying to explain ourselves to those who have no intention of understanding. Not because they don't want to hear us, but because they can't. They're watching a different movie altogether. And here you are, standing outside the theater, trying to explain the plot of your film to someone who's still convinced they're watching theirs. It's exhausting, isn't it? This constant need to justify, to clarify, to make people understand. But what if I told you that the very act of explaining yourself to certain people is like trying to describe color to someone who's determined to see only in black and white? We've been taught that communication is the answer to everything. That if we could just find the right words, the perfect explanation, then surely people would understand. But the truth is far more interesting than that. Some people are so caught up in their own mental constructions, so hypnotized by their own interpretations of reality, that your words become nothing more than noise. And the harder you try to break through, the more energy you lose. It's like shouting into a wind tunnel. The sound goes out, but it never reaches its destination. So let me ask you something. How much of your life have you wasted trying to convince people who were never going to be convinced? How many times have you repeated yourself, rephrased yourself, exhausted yourself? All in the hope that this time they'll finally get it. And what happened? They twisted your words. They heard what they wanted to hear. They made you the villain in their story, no matter how carefully you explained yourself. This is not an accident. This is not a failure of communication. This is a collision between two entirely different states of consciousness. Now, before we go any further, let me be clear about something. I'm not talking about healthy disagreement. I'm not talking about people who genuinely want to understand you but see things differently. I'm talking about something else entirely. I'm talking about people who are living in a kind of trance, a self-created prison of beliefs and illusions, so solid that nothing you say can penetrate it. And the reason nothing penetrates is because they're not interested in truth. They're interested in being right. They're interested in protecting their version of reality, even if that version bears no resemblance to what's actually happening. The moment you realize this, everything changes, because you stop taking it personally. You stop thinking there's something wrong with your words. You realize that the problem was never your explanation. The problem is that you're speaking to someone who has already decided what you mean, what you are, and what you represent. And no amount of explaining will change that. It's like trying to reason with a dream. The dream doesn't care about your logic. It follows its own rules. Let me tell you what happens when you try to explain yourself to someone trapped in illusion. First, you waste your energy. And I don't mean just a little bit of energy. I mean the kind of deep soul-level exhaustion that comes from fighting a battle that was rigged from the start. You pour yourself out trying to be understood, and what do you get back? Confusion, accusations, more questions. It's a loop that never ends because the other person is not interested in understanding. They're interested in their own narrative. And you, my friend, are just a character in their story. A character they've already written. The ancient wisdom traditions understood this. They knew that not everyone is ready to hear the truth. Not everyone can handle it. Some people need their illusions. They need them to survive. Take away their illusions, and they crumble. So they defend those illusions with everything they have. They'll twist your words, attack your character, and if you're still trying to explain yourself to them, you're actually helping them maintain the illusion. Because every time you engage, you give them something to resist. You give them a reason to dig in deeper. There's a story I once heard about a man who spent his entire life trying to convince his neighbor that the sky was blue. The neighbor insisted it was green. So the man brought diagrams, photographs, scientific explanations. He even brought other people to confirm that yes, the sky is blue. But the neighbor wouldn't budge. Green, he said. It's green. And one day, exhausted and defeated, the man gave up. He stopped trying to convince his neighbor. He stopped talking about the sky altogether. And you know what happened? The neighbor became furious. Because without the argument, without the conflict, the neighbor had to face something terrifying, the possibility that he might be wrong. This is what happens when you stop explaining yourself to people trapped in illusion. They get angry, they escalate, they accuse you of abandoning them, of being cold, of not caring. But here's the secret. Their anger is not about you, it's about them. It's about the fact that your silence forces them to look at themselves. And looking at yourself when you've been living in illusion is one of the most uncomfortable things a person can do. So they'd rather you keep talking, keep explaining, Keep playing your part in their drama, because as long as you're engaged, they don't have to change. But you don't have to play that game anymore. You can step back. You can be quiet. You can let them have their version of reality without feeling the need to correct it. This is not indifference. This is wisdom. This is understanding that some battles are not yours to fight. Now here's where it gets interesting. When you stop explaining yourself, something shifts. You begin to conserve your energy. You begin to protect what's sacred, your peace, your clarity, your sense of self. These things are precious. And when you throw them into conversations with people who can't receive them, you're wasting treasure. You're casting pearls before swine, as the saying goes. Not because the people are bad, but because they're not ready, they're not capable of seeing the value in what you're offering. And so they trample it, they mock it. They use it against you. Think about the conversations you've had recently, the ones that left you feeling drained, misunderstood, frustrated. Now ask yourself, was the other person actually listening? Or were they waiting for their turn to talk? Were they trying to understand your perspective? Or were they simply defending their own? If it's the latter, then you were explaining yourself to someone who was never going to hear you. And the energy you spent was energy you'll never get back. There's a certain kind of person who thrives on this dynamic. They love to pull you into endless explanations because it gives them power. The more you explain, the more ammunition they have. They'll take your words, twist them, and throw them back at you in ways you never intended. They'll say, "But you said this," when you said nothing of the sort. They'll interpret your silence as guilt, your patience as weakness, your kindness as manipulation. And no matter what you do, no matter how clearly you speak, they'll find a way to misunderstand you. Because understanding you would require them to change. And change is terrifying. So what do? You stop. You stop explaining. You stop defending. You stop trying to make them see. Because the truth is, they already see. They just don't like what they see. And that's not your problem. Your problem is that you've been taking responsibility for their perception. You've been acting as though their misunderstanding is your failure. But it's not. Their misunderstanding is their choice. Let me tell you what happens when you embrace silence. First, you reclaim your power. When you stop giving explanations, you stop giving away your authority. You stop acting as though you need their approval, their validation, their understanding. You simply are. And there's something incredibly powerful about that. It's the power of a person who no longer needs to defend their existence. The power of someone who knows their worth is not determined by whether others can see it. Second, you create space. Space for truth to emerge on its own. Space for the other person to sit with their own thoughts without your constant input. Space for God, or the universe, or whatever you want to call that deeper intelligence, to work. When you're always talking, always explaining, you fill up all the space. But when you're silent, something else can enter, and often that something else is far more effective than anything you could have said. Third, you begin to discern. You begin to see who is genuinely interested in understanding you, and who is simply interested in the drama. The people who truly care will accept your silence with grace. They'll give you space. They'll trust that you have your reasons. But the people who are trapped in illusion will panic. They'll demand explanations. They'll accuse you of being secretive, distant, cold. And in their reaction, they'll reveal exactly why you were right to stop explaining in the first place. Now let's talk about what silence is not. Silence is not avoidance. It's not running away from difficult conversations or refusing to communicate when communication is genuinely needed. Silence is discernment. It's knowing when words will help and when they'll only make things worse. It's recognizing that some people are not ready for your truth, and that's okay. You don't need everyone to be ready. You just need to be wise enough not to waste your pearls on those who can't appreciate them. Silence is also not punishment. It's not a way of getting back at someone or making them feel bad.
It's simply a boundary, a way of saying, I will not participate in this particular dance anymore. Because the dance of endless explanation is exhausting. It keeps you small. It keeps you stuck. And it keeps the other person stuck too, because they never have to face their own illusions, as long as you're there to argue with them. Here's the thing about illusion. It's comfortable. It's familiar. People build entire identities around their illusions. They construct elaborate mental frameworks to support them. And when you come along with your truth, your clarity, your different perspective, you're threatening the entire structure. You're asking them to tear down what they've spent years building. And most people won't do that. They'll defend their illusion with everything they have. They'll fight you, blame you, vilify you, anything to keep their world intact. And you know what? That's their right. They have every right to live in whatever reality they choose. But you have a right too. You have the right to stop exhausting yourself trying to change their mind. You have the right to walk away from conversations that go nowhere. You have the right to protect your energy, your peace, your sanity. And you exercise that right through silence, through the simple, powerful act of not engaging. There's an old saying that goes something like this: never argue with a fool. Onlookers may not be able to tell the difference. But I'd take it a step further. Never explain yourself to someone who has already decided what you are, because no explanation will change their mind. They've made their judgment. They've written their story, and you're wasting your breath trying to edit it. Instead, save your words for those who can hear them. Save your energy for relationships that actually nourish you. Save your truth for people who are hungry for it. Because there are people out there who will understand you without lengthy explanations. There are people who will see you clearly without you having to perform, or prove, or justify. And those are the people worth your time. But what about the others? What about the people trapped in illusion who keep demanding your attention, your explanations, your defense? Let them go, not with anger or resentment, but with compassion. Let them have their illusion. Let them believe whatever they need to believe, and trust that if they're meant to wake up, they will. But it won't be because you convinced them. It will be because life itself taught them. And life is a far better teacher than you could ever be. So here's what I'm asking you to do. The next time someone demands an explanation from you, someone who has already decided what you are, what you meant, what you did, pause, take a breath, and ask yourself, will this explanation actually help? Or will it just give them more material to misinterpret? If it's the latter, stay silent. Let them sit with their assumptions. Let them fill in the blanks however they want. Because their interpretation says far more about them than it does about you. And in that silence, you'll find something extraordinary. You'll find yourself. Not the version of yourself that bends and twists to be understood. Not the version that exhausts itself trying to please everyone. But the real you. The you that exists regardless of whether anyone understands or not. The you that doesn't need validation because it knows its own truth. And that version of you is far more powerful than any explanation you could ever give. Stop explaining yourself to people trapped in illusion, not because you're giving up on them, not because you don't care, but because you finally understand that some people aren't ready to see, and that's okay. Let them have their blindness. Let them have their confusion. Let them have their version of you. Because the real you, the one that knows, the one that sees, the one that simply is, doesn't need their approval. Your peace is more valuable than their understanding. Your energy is more precious than their acceptance. Your truth is more important than their opinion. Remember that. Hold on to that. And the next time you feel that familiar urge to explain, to defend, to justify, just stop. Be still. Be quiet. Be free. Because silence, my friend, is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of wisdom. And wisdom knows when to speak and when to simply let things be. There is beneath all our cleverness a quiet faculty that no machine can mimic. It is the art of listening to what is not being said. When you step into a room, something stirs long before language begins. You can sense who holds the center of gravity, who hides behind a polite expression, who aches to be seen without daring to say so. This is not analysis. It is awareness, older than the mind itself. It is the body knowing before the mind interferes. Modern life teaches us to speak quickly, to think sharply, to fill every silence with words. But the more noise we make, the more we lose the subtle music underneath it all. Social intelligence is not the power to persuade or impress. It is the quiet attunement to the living current flowing between human beings. When you move from this stillness, others do not merely hear you, they resonate with you. For connection is not made through speech, but through the shared silence beneath it. Most of what passes between human beings is never spoken. The real conversation happens in the pauses, in the soft currents that flow beneath the surface of words. Think of a moment when someone said, "I'm fine," but you felt they weren't. No evidence, no argument, just a quiet knowing in your chest. Or the way a friend's silence felt heavier than any explanation could be. This is where social intelligence lives. Not in clever speeches, but in the spaces between them. We've built a culture that worships language. The louder, the sharper, the better. We teach people to talk, but seldom to listen. And when silence arrives, most grow restless, as though something essential has gone missing. But silence isn't absence. Silence is the ground from which real connection grows. Words are like ripples on water. They reveal movement, but the depth is felt below. When you learn to sense beneath words, you begin to hear the tremor behind a laugh, the hesitation before a yes, the small griefs tucked inside ordinary sentences. To be socially intelligent is to allow yourself to feel these undercurrents without rushing to fix or explain them. It's to be present enough for another person to exhale, not because you solved their problem, but because they finally felt understood. Real connection doesn't happen in speeches. It happens in the quiet recognition that two human beings are breathing the same moment. To move with grace among others, one must first learn the quiet art of knowing oneself. Social intelligence is not a mask you wear to impress. It begins with the stillness within you, the inner compass. When you are at odds with your own emotions, everything outside becomes distorted. A simple look may feel like judgment, a silence like rejection. But when you begin to understand your own tides, anger, fear, longing, joy, you no longer drown in them, you float. And from that calm water, it becomes possible to see others clearly. Emotional intelligence is that inner compass. It's the ability to feel a storm inside without being swept away. But a compass alone is not enough. A sailor who never looks outward will lose the shore. Social intelligence is the map, the ability to navigate the subtle landscapes of other hearts. Every person carries their own weather. Some arrive like sunlight, others like quiet rain. When your inner compass is steady, you can sense their changing skies without confusing them for your own. You begin to notice the tremor in someone's breath, the way their words don't always match their eyes. And rather than reacting, you respond. This is the balance, to know where you stand within and to walk gently in the world without. One keeps you anchored, the other lets you travel far. To read another person is not to pry into them, nor to decode them like a puzzle. It is to stand quietly at the edge of their being and allow yourself to feel the ripples they make in the world. Most people imagine communication as something that happens through words, but the body speaks long before the mouth does. A slight tightening around the eyes, the way someone inhales before answering, the small delay before a smile, all these are little doorways into the unspoken. And you don't need special training to notice them. You only need to stop rushing past what is already there. We live in an age that values quick answers, fast replies, and clever remarks. But the art of reading people belongs to a slower rhythm. It happens when you allow your mind to quiet, your eyes to soften, your presence to stretch beyond your own thoughts. And in that stillness, something extraordinary occurs. People begin to reveal themselves, not because you force them to, but because they feel seen. They feel you're listening. To read people is not to control or manipulate. It's to listen with the whole of your being. To notice when a voice trembles, but the words remain strong. To sense when a silence is tender and when it is full of pain. You don't interpret them, you meet them. The moment you truly see another person, not through the fog of your own judgments, but through quiet attention, something shifts in the air between you. It's almost invisible, like the faint change in temperature before rain. This is where trust begins. Not in grand gestures or elaborate promises, but in the simple human recognition. I am being felt. I am not alone in here. People don't trust because of what you say. They trust because, for a brief moment, they sense that their inner world has been noticed without being handled. It is the rare experience of being understood without being interrupted. This kind of presence is not decoration, it's foundation. When someone feels seen at this level, defenses soften. The walls they spent years building loosen, even just a little. And from that quiet opening, trust begins to take root. Not as an agreement, but as a shared silence between two human beings. Trust is a strange thing. You cannot demand it, you cannot force it, and you cannot bargain for it. It grows the way dawn arrives, slowly, without announcement. Real influence does not belong to the loudest voice in the room, but to the presence that others feel is steady. You've seen it before. Someone speaks softly, and yet the room listens. Not because their words are dazzling, but because people can sense something beneath them. A quiet ground, a sincerity that asks for nothing. Social intelligence isn't about persuading people to bend to your will. It is the art of becoming someone others feel safe to open their world to. Trust is built not through clever arguments, but through the simple consistency of presence. When you truly listen, not to reply, not to prove, but simply to be there, people recognize it immediately. It touches something older than logic. It says, I see you, I'm not here to fix you, I'm here to be with you. And from that trust, influence flows on its own. Not as pressure, but as gravity. Gentle, invisible, effortless. A tree does not convince you of its shade. You simply walk toward it because it stands where it has always stood. So it is with trust. Influence is not the storm. It is the still air that gathers people without a word. Long before we learn to speak, we learn to feel one another. Long before we built cities and systems, we gathered around firelight, reading the flicker in someone's eyes more easily than the words that came after. Connection is not a modern skill. It is the oldest language we share. The rhythm of another's breath, the tremor in their voice, the heaviness or lightness of their silence. Your body knows how to read this. It always has. It is not something you learn so much as something you remember. Modern life often makes us forget. We build walls of analysis, of speed, of distraction. But beneath it all, your nervous system is still listening, still tuning itself to the quiet music between people. When someone is in pain, a part of you aches. When someone laughs, something in you softens. This isn't sentimentality. It is the design of being human. We are wired to connect the way trees lean toward light. And when you allow yourself to trust that instinct, to sense before you speak, to feel before you explain, your interactions become less about control and more about attunement. In that space, conversation turns into something older than language. Two beings remembering they were never truly separate. We live in an age where noise has become the default setting. Not just the restless noise of the world, but the chatter inside the mind that never seems to rest. Everyone is speaking. Few are listening. And in that endless exchange of words, presence is lost. Presence isn't a performance. It isn't about perfect posture, nodding at the right time or pretending to be calm. It's the art of being here fully, without rehearsing what comes next. You felt it before. When someone looks at you, not past you. When their attention doesn't wander. When you feel in the marrow of your being that in this moment you don't have to explain yourself. Their silence is not empty. It is spacious. In a world so addicted to distraction, presence has become rare and therefore powerful. It slows the rhythm of conversation. It turns noise into music. It allows the small, quiet truths in people to rise to the surface without being drowned out. Machines may outthink us, but they cannot be with us. They cannot offer the kind of stillness that makes another human exhale. Presence is not something you build. It's something you stop covering up. And when you offer that kind of space to others, they recognize it immediately. Not with their intellect, but with their soul. What binds us most deeply is rarely spoken. The most honest conversations are carried in the eyes, in the tilt of the head, in the rhythm of a breath shared between two people who need not explain themselves. Empathy isn't a technique. It is the simple act of standing beside another human being without rushing to correct or repair their experience. It is the art of feeling with, not fixing for. When someone is grieving, words often fall short, but a steady hand, a soft gaze, or a quiet presence can speak with a language older than speech itself. We often imagine that influence comes from great speeches or brilliant arguments, yet more often it comes from the silent way we meet another person's heart. To be empathetic is not to drown in another's feeling. It is to let your presence become wide enough to hold it gently, as a river holds the reflection of the moon, without grasping, without claiming, without needing to change it. But empathy without ground becomes a flood. If you lean too far into another's storm, you may lose your footing. And when that happens, compassion turns to confusion, listening turns to reaction. This is where many people falter, not because they don't care, but because they haven't yet learned to stand firm in the winds they invite. To offer true presence is not to carry someone else's pain as your own. It is to hold space for it without becoming it, like a tree that bends but does not break. And it is in these moments, when emotions grow heavy, that the quiet art of emotional mastery begins. Not as control, but as a return to center. From empathy, we step gently into strength. Conflict in itself is not the enemy. It is simply a moment when two worlds meet and neither wishes to disappear. Most people treat conflict as a battlefield, rushing to defend their position, to prove themselves right. But the wise approach it as a mirror. What unsettles us in another often touches something unsteady within ourselves. When anger rises, when pride stiffens the spine, when the voice grows sharp, that is not the moment to conquer the other. It is the moment to return to stillness. Emotional mastery does not mean suppressing feeling. It means meeting it like an old friend who has come to deliver a message. If you can remain steady, when your chest tightens, when your breath grows shallow, you will find that conflict loses its teeth. Your stillness becomes the calm center around which the storm turns. And from this place, listening returns. The other person no longer feels they are fighting against you, but being heard by you. And when listening enters a room, truth becomes possible again. To master emotion is not to harden against life. It is to stand in its waves without losing your balance. When one of you remains anchored, the quarrel slowly remembers its humanity. And what began as tension becomes an opening. What follows is not victory or defeat, but quiet. The air between you no longer strains under the weight of opposing wills. It loosens. A calm begins to shape itself in the space where resistance once lived. This is the quiet strength that does not need to announce itself. When you remain steady in the storm, you become something people lean toward without quite knowing why. It isn't about being wiser or stronger. It's about not leaving yourself. Others may raise their voices, their defenses, their fears, but your stillness does not mirror their storm, like the riverbank beside a rushing current. You give shape to the moment without trying to control the water. In that kind of presence, something in the other person begins to settle too. People rarely remember arguments in detail, but they remember how they felt when they stood near someone who did not fight them back. Safety is not a speech. It's a felt thing, quiet, wordless, and unmistakable. To become a safe space is not to fix others. It is simply to be a place where their walls can rest, where their breath can drop a little lower into the body. And when you carry that steadiness into the world, you stop trying to win people over. They come closer on their own. True social intelligence is not a set of tricks or polished performances. It is not how well you speak, how charming you sound, or how quickly you think. It is the quiet art of being so fully yourself that others feel free to be themselves too. All the techniques, reading people, building trust, mastering emotion, they are only different doors that lead back to the same place, presence. The presence that listens more than it explains. The presence that steadies rather than reacts. The presence that does not need to win to be strong. When people leave your company, they will not replay your perfect sentences. They will remember how they felt around you, whether they could breathe a little easier, whether they felt seen, whether they felt safe. And that is the real power here, not to shine above others, but to become a space where they no longer need to defend themselves. Social intelligence is not learned in books alone. It is remembered in the silence between words, in the calm between storms, in the stillness you carry inside. When you embody that, you no longer need to try to connect. Connection happens on its own.
It is a curious thing, this tendency we all share, the urge to hold on to people, to hold on to ideas, to hold on to the stories we tell about who we are and what the world is. We clutch at memories of the past, as though replaying them might somehow make them last forever. We grip tightly at visions of the future, as if our grasp could bend time to obey our plans. And yet, in all this holding, we discover a strange weight. Instead of safety, it gives us a kind of suffocation. Instead of comfort, it makes us anxious, always fearing the moment when our grip might slip. Why do we hold on so desperately? It is because we have been taught that to let go is to lose. If I let go of this relationship, I will be abandoned. If I let go of this belief, I will be adrift. If I let go of control, everything will fall apart. And so, with clenched fists, we drag the baggage of yesterday into today and try to pack tomorrow into the same suitcase until we are exhausted under the sheer weight of it. But life, you see, is not meant to be carried like this. Life is a river, not a stone. It moves, it flows, it shifts. And when we try to grasp the current, we only end up with water slipping through our fingers. The tighter we hold, the more we realize we cannot truly hold at all. Consider for a moment the simple act of breathing. You breathe in, and then you must breathe out. If you try to only inhale, clinging to the air as though to lose it would mean to lose your life, you will suffocate. The very act of living requires release. It requires the rhythm of in and out, of taking and giving, of holding and letting go. And yet, when it comes to our attachments, we try to live as though we can only inhale, never exhale. The result is the same suffocation, but this time in our minds and our hearts. Look also at nature's trees. Each autumn, they shed their leaves, releasing what no longer serves them. They do not argue with the season. They do not cling to what has had its time. And because they let go, they are renewed. Spring comes and new leaves burst forth. Imagine if the tree resisted. Imagine if it gripped every leaf in panic, crying, "I cannot let this one go. It is mine. It defines me." What would happen? The tree would rot, unable to grow, unable to flourish. It is only in release that life finds its rhythm. But we, unlike the tree, tell ourselves stories. We imagine that if we let go, we will fall into emptiness. We imagine we are separate little beings standing against the tide of existence, and that if we do not hold on, the tide will wash us away. And so we resist, and we resist until the struggle becomes unbearable. Think of how we hold on to relationships that have already ended in spirit, afraid of the silence that might follow. We hold on to old identities. I am this kind of person. I cannot change. I must always live this way, even when the skin has grown too tight, like clothes from childhood that no longer fit. We hold on to resentments, to grievances, to past mistakes, dragging them behind us like heavy stones, all the while wondering why we feel so tired. But the truth is, letting go is not the opposite of love, nor the opposite of care. To let go is not to reject. It is to recognize the natural movement of things, just as waves rise and fall, just as days begin and end, just as lives appear and dissolve. So too does every form, every moment, follow the rhythm of arising and passing. To resist this rhythm is to resist life itself. It is like trying to stop a river with your hands. You may feel, for a brief instant, that you are succeeding, but soon the current pushes past, stronger than your grip, indifferent to your effort. And then you are left exhausted while the river flows on. But why do we resist so fiercely? Because we mistake holding for control. We believe that if we grip tightly enough, we can preserve what we love, secure what we fear to lose, or shape the future to our design. And yet, have you noticed? The things we cling to most fiercely are often the very ones that slip away. Think of the lover smothered by another's insecurity. who leaves not because of lack of love, but because they cannot breathe under the grip. Think of the person so obsessed with controlling every detail of their life that they leave no room for surprise, no room for spontaneity, and so they find themselves trapped in the very order they desired. Think of the one who cannot release the memory of a wound, and so carries it, reliving the pain again and again, as though it were happening now. In all of this, the fear of letting go is the fear of death in miniature. For to let go is to allow something to end, to allow a moment to pass, a form to dissolve, a self to change. And because we fear the great death, the dissolution of our own body, our own ego, we fear all the little deaths along the way. We imagine that by holding on, we can resist the great tide, keep ourselves intact, but in truth, it is the clinging that breaks us. You may notice this in the smallest of things. Try to hold water in a tight fist, and it escapes. Hold it gently, with an open palm, and it rests with you for a while. Try to clutch at love, and it suffocates. Let it breathe, and it grows. Try to force your life into rigid certainty, and it rebels. Allow it to flow, and it carries you further than you could have planned. So the problem is not that life takes things away. The problem is that we refuse to see that life is always taking and giving, always flowing, always changing. To demand permanence in a world of movement is to fight against the very essence of what is. The suffering of holding on is not only in the loss itself, but in the constant tension, the vigilance, the anxiety of guarding what cannot be guarded. Like a man clutching a rope that is fraying in his hands, we exhaust ourselves trying to prevent the inevitable. And in doing so, we miss the beauty of what is still here, still alive, still present. And so, you may notice, fear grows not from reality itself, but from the stories we weave. If I let this go, I will be nothing. If I release control, life will collapse. These are shadows of thought, not truths. For in fact, you are already letting go in every moment. You let go of each breath, or you would die. You let go of each moment, or time would freeze. You let go of sleep each morning, or the day could never begin. Letting go is already the rhythm of your being. You cannot resist it forever. You can only blind yourself to it. The great paradox is that by clinging, you do not preserve life, you smother it. By resisting change, you do not secure safety, you create fear. By holding on, you do not keep things as they are, you hasten their decay. And so, we must see clearly, the fear of letting go is born from an illusion, the illusion that we are separate from the flow, that life is something happening to us rather than as us. But once you see that you are the river itself, the need to clutch at each drop begins to fade. The beginning of wisdom is to see the cost of holding on, to see that it is not safety, but weight, not love, but suffocation, not freedom, but prison. Only when this is seen can the heart begin to loosen its grip. And so, as you sit here listening, perhaps you can feel in your own life what it is you are clutching. Perhaps a person, perhaps a story, perhaps an image of yourself. Feel the tension of it, the way it weighs upon you. Notice that it is not the thing itself that weighs you down, but the clinging. And see, if only for a moment, that there may be another way. If holding on binds us in tension, then letting go is the beginning of freedom. Yet, many hear this and immediately recoil. If I let go, won't I lose everything? Won't life spin into chaos? Won't I fall into nothingness? But you see, this is the illusion. For letting go does not mean falling into emptiness, it means falling into life. It means aligning yourself with the rhythm that has been carrying you all along. Think again of breathing. You let go of the breath not to die, but to live. The release makes room for the next inhalation, the next renewal. Imagine if you refuse to exhale, clinging desperately to the air as though your survival depended upon it. You would suffocate. The irony is clear. You live because you let go, again and again. This rhythm of release is everywhere. The trees let go of their leaves so that new growth may appear. The snake sheds its skin, or else it cannot expand. The earth itself shifts, quakes, moves, so that new mountains may rise, new valleys may form. To let go is not a failure of life, but its very condition. Now, notice what happens in you when you release. Perhaps you have experienced it already. You cling to some resentment, some injury from the past. You replay it, you nurse it, you rehearse the words you should have said, and then, one day, perhaps out of exhaustion, you let it go. And what do you feel? Relief, lightness. The world, unchanged in its outer form, suddenly appears brighter. The sky seems wider, the air easier to breathe. Nothing has changed but the grip of your hand, and in that small gesture, everything is transformed. So letting go is not loss, but transformation. It is not the end of love, but the beginning of freedom within love. For when you hold someone too tightly, you do not love them, you possess them. And possession strangles. To love is to let another be, to allow them the freedom of their own movement, their own becoming. And when you grant this, you discover something extraordinary, that love does not vanish when released. It grows, it deepens, it breathes. Letting go of control is much the same. You may imagine that unless you manage every detail, life will collapse into disorder. But in truth, life is already happening without your command. Your heart beats without your orders, your cells divide, your blood flows, your breath moves, the earth spins, the stars burn, all without your intervention. Control is a story, a game we play with ourselves. Life does not wait for your instructions. So what happens when you release this compulsion to control? At first, fear, because the ego imagines it is the master, and to surrender is to die. But beneath that fear is a discovery that life carries you more gracefully than you could ever carry yourself. Like a swimmer who finally stops thrashing and allows the water to hold them, you realize you are buoyant. You do not sink into chaos. You float into harmony. Now, letting go does not mean apathy. It does not mean turning your back on life or abandoning care. It means participating without clinging, engaging without grasping. It is like dancing with a partner. If you clutch at them, the dance is stiff and awkward. If you collapse and refuse to move, the dance cannot happen at all. But if you allow, give and take, guiding and yielding, the dance becomes alive, spontaneous, free. So it is with life. You are not to be a puppet, dragged helplessly, nor are you to be a tyrant, forcing every step. You are to be a dancer, moving with the rhythm, listening, responding, trusting. This is what the Chinese call wu wei, not forcing, not straining, but moving with the grain of the universe. Now, one of the greatest fears in letting go is the fear of death. We cling to life, imagining that if we grip hard enough, we can stave off the inevitable. But death is not the enemy. Death is the great letting go, and without it, life would not be. Just as sleep is necessary to renew the body, so death renews the cycle of existence. The leaf falls, but the tree lives on. The wave dissolves, but the ocean remains. And so, when you let go in small ways of a thought, of a grievance, of a fear, you are practicing the art of dying. You are rehearsing the great surrender that will one day come to us all. And in practicing it, you discover that death is not destruction, but renewal. What falls away makes room for what is to come. Even time itself teaches this. You cannot cling to a single moment. Try as you may to preserve it, the moment passes. The laughter fades, the embrace ends, the sunset gives way to night. And yet, this is not a tragedy, for the very passing makes room for what is next. If the day did not end, the night could not begin. If the note did not fade, the song could not continue. Life is not in the holding of one instant, but in the continuous flow from one to another. So, letting go is not abandonment. It is participation in the rhythm of existence. It is to see that you are not separate from the flow, standing against it, but the flow itself. You are not the hand clutching at the river. You are the river. And once this is seen, the fear begins to loosen. Now, notice in your own life where this might be so. Perhaps there is a person you cannot release, even though the time has passed. Perhaps there is a version of yourself you cling to, though it no longer fits. Perhaps there is a fear you rehearse endlessly, as if preparing for it could prevent it. And see, just for a moment, what it would feel like to open your hand, not to push it away, not to destroy it, but simply to release. Feel the lightness in that image, the freedom. This is the invitation of letting go. And here is the curious thing. When you let go, what is real does not vanish. Love remains, but it is free. The self remains, but it is flexible. Life remains, but it is lighter. What vanishes is the tension, the anxiety, the weight of clutching at shadows. You lose nothing but your chains. So the practice of letting go is not about throwing life away, but about finally receiving it. For as long as your hands are clenched, they cannot receive. Only the open hand can be filled. Only the relaxed heart can feel joy. Only the surrendered mind can discover peace. This is why the sages and mystics, again and again, spoke of surrender, not as defeat, but as liberation, not as loss, but as gain. To surrender is to see that you were never in control to begin with, and that this is not bad news, but the best news possible. For it means you are carried, sustained, supported by something far greater than the little I you believed yourself to be. So when you are afraid of letting go, remember this: you have been letting go all along. Each breath, each moment, each night's sleep, you have already practiced surrender countless times, and each time, life has continued. The fear is a story, not a reality. And when you release even a little, you discover the great secret. Life holds you. The ocean does not drop its waves. The sky does not abandon its clouds. The earth does not reject its children. You belong always. And letting go is the way you remember it. So let yourself soften. Let yourself breathe. Let the clenched fist open. The guarded heart relax. The worried mind fall silent. You will not fall into nothingness. You will fall into everything. For letting go is not the end. It is the beginning of freedom.
You see, living merely to await a brilliant tomorrow is the most refined way to steal one's own life. Imagine you're walking up an endless staircase. In Latin, gradius means step, and we call the years of schooling grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, then graduation, gradus, gradus, gradus. You climb and climb, as if each step were a promise of something greater. Finally, when you stand at the very top, perhaps as the chairman of a massive corporation, you suddenly feel a strange emptiness. You've conquered everything, but now what? There are no more steps to climb, and since you were never taught how to pause, to breathe, to feel this moment, you become lost in your own victory. Our education system, with all its seriousness and structure, never guides you on how to exist right in the breath of the present. It only trains you to postpone joy, to push everything into a vague future. Then one day, when you're exhausted from all those gradus, an insurance agent knocks on the door and whispers, "I have the perfect thing for you, a retirement plan. Just be patient until you're 65, when you leave the work grind, and you'll truly live, truly enjoy." Enjoy what? Exactly. With prostate pains, hormonal changes, dentures, and all the annoyances of old age, That's an empty promise, a way to extend the deferral of life. The art of living in the eternal moment, what people call now, is never taught in classrooms. Why? Because it's seen as irresponsible, lazy, lacking ambition. But listen, enjoying life isn't a luxury. It's the most basic human duty. If you don't learn how to do it, you'll become a burden to yourself and the world around you. You'll grow aggressive, seek to seize, manipulate others, turn into a power-mad tyrant, all because you haven't grasped the simple, cheap secret of being fully present in this second. In truth, sustaining a human life doesn't require that much energy. Think about it. How much food is enough? What do you wear to cover and warm yourself? How much space do you need to dwell? It all boils down to needs so basic, they're almost simplistic. And that simplicity opens the door to savoring the most refined things. Watching a raindrop slide down the window pane, feeling how it curves, how light refracts, how it merges with the world outside. That's a free performance, a masterpiece of the universe. But if you tell someone you're entranced by it, they'll shake their head. Are you crazy? Why not do something more important? More important here means what? It means causing disruption, intervening, progressing. We're indoctrinated with the idea that a person's value lies in changing the world, in pushing everything forward. We confuse natural growth, like trees growing, with progress as defined by humans. Without a grand project, without bustling activity, without future goals, you're labeled lazy, useless. But those who don't chase the future say, you're the crazy ones. You work to accumulate for a tomorrow that never comes, while we live fully today. Look at how a traditional Chinese person works. He labors just enough to have money, then stops, goes to a tea house, gambles a bit, smokes a pipe, or simply wanders admiring the scenery. We call that irresponsible. Not maintaining the world properly. But perhaps that way of living is the true maintenance. Perhaps we, with our Protestant work ethic of ceaseless labor, with the belief that everything must be controlled, must progress, are the ones destroying the planet. We eradicate diseases, extend lifespans, but end up creating nuclear bombs to wipe it all out. That's the logical outcome of living for the future, promising forever, and when there's nothing left to promise, only destruction remains. Peoples untouched by the whirlpool of politics, Native American tribes, indigenous Mexicans, Africans, don't understand us, and we don't understand them, because they have no desire for what we call an ideal society. A few were convinced, like in Japan. They plunged into Western-style industrialization, and now cities like Nara, Osaka, Kobe are choked in smog, Tokyo a chaotic nightmare. They're reaping the consequences of chasing the illusion of the future. In the Hindu worldview, time is a cycle called yuga, starting from a golden age, then gradually declining, everything just unraveling over the ages. That's a reminder, escape the wheel of time, escape that rat race. This very idea underlies the political philosophy of redirection that I propose. Lead Western people out of history, out of the belief that we're in a process leading to something better forever. In reality, that process only leads to ever greater destruction. Live a timeless way of life, indefinite, far more appealing than a life devoted to time. Technology isn't the enemy. It brings the power to completely eliminate poverty. But if we view technology through the lens of history, as part of unending progress, it will fail. The distribution problem of wealth from technology isn't material, it's psychological. People are hypnotized by money, seeing it as having intrinsic value instead of just a symbol. Imagine a cosmic joke. Money, which we worship like a god, is really just numbers dancing in ledgers. Ramakrishna once said gold is one of humanity's great calamities, not because the metal shines, but because we mistake the symbol for reality. There's a funny story I like to retell. Long ago, banks around the world got tired of shipping physical gold across oceans, so they set up a central island in the Pacific. All the gold was gathered there, in a massive vault. For exchanges, they'd just push carts of gold down a short street between branches. Everything ran smoothly for a decade. Then one day, the bank owners brought their wives and kids to visit the island. Threw a grand party. They checked the books. Perfect. Finally, the kids clamored, "Dad, show us the gold." The vault managers started stammering, sweating. It's a bit difficult. It needs some preparation." The bank owner barked, "Nonsense. Show the kids the gold now. Finally, the truth came out. 7 years earlier, a submarine earthquake had swallowed the entire vault. But don't worry, they still recorded exactly how much gold each side owned in the books. So the gold was gone, but the value remained. On paper, we laugh uproariously, but that's exactly how the world works today. Money isn't gold, isn't resources, isn't real wealth, just promises, signs, collective magic. The US dollar prints. The United States government promises to pay $1. Pay with what? Another piece of paper. Money is debt, credit, packaged faith. The problem isn't lack of food, housing, clothing, technology produces in surplus. The problem is we're hypnotized by numbers on bank screens. We burn food in America while children starve in India, not because of shortage, but because the books don't balance. That's a refined form of madness. We can feed the whole planet, but let millions starve just for a symbol. The solution sounds equally mad. Reverse taxation. Instead of collecting from people, issue credit, but credit tied to actual total output, not phantom gold or empty promises. Then everyone can exchange what they create without monetary barriers blocking them. This isn't an economic issue. It's psychological. We're trapped in the illusion called Maya in Indian philosophy, the veil over reality. The future is part of that veil. We live as if tomorrow is when life really begins. Imagine you're a donkey with a fishing pole around your neck, a carrot dangling at the end right in front of your nose. You walk and walk, the carrot always there, always in reach, but never touched. That's the perfect image of modern man. We chase the future, chase retirement, chase when I'm rich then, when I retire then, when the kids are grown then, and when you finally bite the carrot, achieve the goal, you realize it's just a plastic fake, or worse, it's long withered. Classical Eastern people don't fall into this trap. They work just enough to live, then stop. They don't see work as life's purpose, but as a means. A Japanese blacksmith might spend the morning forging a blade, then the afternoon sitting watching cherry blossoms fall. We call that laziness. They call it living. When you're not obsessed with the future, you don't need infinite accumulation. You don't need a big house, fancy car, overflowing closet, because you don't use them to fill an inner void. That void can only be filled by presence, hearing leaves rustle, feeling the warmth of a teacup in your hand, smelling earth after rain. But our society is built on fear of scarcity. We're taught that if we don't accumulate, don't prepare, don't progress, we'll fall into misery. So we run forever, like hamsters on a wheel. And the wheel spins so fast we don't realize we're standing still. Technology advances, the wheel spins faster. We have washing machines, dishwashers, cars, planes, all to save time. Save time for what? To work more, earn more, buy more time savers. The perfect circle of meaninglessness. Meanwhile, a farmer in Bali might spend the day sitting under a coconut tree, watching waves crash. He has no insurance, no retirement fund, no 5-year plan. But he has what we've lost, peace in this moment. He doesn't wait for tomorrow to live, because he knows tomorrow is just a notion. Today is all he has, and today is enough. We need a revolution not in politics, not in economics, but in perception. Redirect people away from history, away from the story that we're progressing toward a future paradise. History is a linear tale, from primitive to civilized, from poverty to prosperity, from war to peace. But reality isn't linear. Reality is cyclical. Birth, dwelling, change, extinction. Every empire collapses. Every technology obsolesces. Every future promise vanishes. Only this moment is real. Technology can be a tool for liberation, if used right. Imagine, machines do all heavy work, automate food production, energy, housing. People don't need to work 8 hours a day. We could work 2 hours, or nothing at all, and still have enough. But for that to happen, we must abandon the illusion of money as a measure of value. We must abandon the belief that hard work is moral. We must learn to live without future goals. Now let's step together into an imaginary garden. Not a manicured Versailles type, but a wild garden where grass grows haphazardly, flowers bloom by season, and no one bothers to prune. Here, time isn't the enemy, it's a companion. A butterfly lands on a petal, you stop to watch. not to record or photograph, but just because it's happening. That's timeless living. No schedule, no destination, only presence. But this garden isn't far away. It's right in the breath you're taking, in the bird song outside the window, in the feel of your hand on the wooden table. Our society fears that garden. We're taught that without plans, goals, a mission, life is meaningless. Try telling your boss you want a day off to watch clouds drift. He'll think you've lost your mind. Try telling friends you don't need a promotion, a bigger house. They'll worry about your future. We're imprisoned in an invisible jail with bars made of promises. Just try a little harder and you'll be happy. But that little harder lasts a lifetime, and happiness dangles out of reach. Look at how children play. A 3-year-old can spend hours stacking Lego, not to build the world's tallest tower, but for the joy of each brick clicking. It doesn't think about growing up to be an architect. It has no concept of wasted time. Then we adults step in and teach. Stop playing. Go study, so you can succeed later. We strip away their wild garden, replace it with an industrial field, rows upon rows, straight, efficient, but soulless. We adults once had that garden too, but lost it. We replace natural joy with conditional joy. I'll be happy when I have a degree, when I have a partner, when I have a house, when I have kids, when I retire. Each time we achieve, we set a new condition. That's how the ego, hypnotized by time, operates. In Taoist philosophy, Lao Tzu said, "The one who knows enough is rich. Not rich from owning much, but rich from needing nothing more." The Taoist elder's garden is just a thatched hut, a pine tree, a stream. But he sits there, smiling at drifting clouds, feeling he owns the universe. Technology, used rightly, can return the garden to us. Imagine a world where robots plant rice, machines weave cloth, solar power provides free electricity. People don't work to live. They work if they want, or do nothing. A painter paints because colors move him. A musician plays because sounds make him alive. No one asks, how much does your art contribute to GDP? No one measures life's value in work hours. That's not far-fetched utopia. It's possible today if we dare abandon the illusion of earning a living. But to abandon, we must face the greatest fear, that if we don't run, we'll fall into the abyss, that if we don't accumulate, we'll starve, that if we have no goals, we'll be empty. These fears are nurtured from childhood. Study hard for a good job later, save so you don't suffer later, work hard to rest later, all based on the premise that the present isn't enough, that only the future is worthwhile. But what is the future? It's a notion, a ghost. When you reach that future, it's become the present, and you need a new future. In Zen, there's a famous koan. Before enlightenment, I chopped wood, carried water. After enlightenment, I chopped wood, carried water. Nothing changes outside, but everything changes inside. Work is no longer a means to something. It is itself. Chopping wood is chopping wood. Carrying water is carrying water. Watching rain is watching rain. No, so that later. That's timeless living. Every action self-perfect, needing no reason beyond itself. Try a small experiment. For 10 minutes, do nothing. Just sit, breathe, look. No phone, no music, no thinking about to-do lists. At first you'll fidget. The brain will scream, wasting time, do something useful. But if you persist, a magical moment comes, stillness. You realize that without doing, you still exist, still complete. Those 10 minutes aren't lost. They're 10 minutes you truly lived. Our society doesn't teach this experiment. Schools teach math, literature, science, all aimed at later. No one teaches, today, sit still and feel your heartbeat. No one teaches, eat a bite of rice and really taste it. We're trained into efficient machines, but not into humans. The result? We can build rockets to Mars, but can't sit still for a minute without guilt. A friend once told me about his grandfather, a central Vietnamese farmer who only knew plowing fields, planting rice his whole life. No TV, no radio, no concept of retirement. Every evening he sat on the porch, smoked a water pipe, watched the moon, asked, "Do you have any dreams?" He laughed. "What are dreams? I have rice to eat, a place to sleep, the moon to watch. Enough." We laugh at his spiritual poverty. But perhaps we're the poor ones because we don't know enough. Technology can help us return to the garden, but only if we change our view. Instead of using machines to produce more, use them to need less. Instead of building factories for jobs, build parks for people to play. Instead of inventing apps to save time, invent ways for people to enjoy time. That's the real revolution. Not changing the outer world, but the inner. Imagine a morning without an alarm. No bell, no meetings, no urgent messages. You open your eyes, sunlight filters through leaves, and instead of jumping up, you lie there, listening to your own breath. That's not laziness. It's the first time in years you've allowed yourself to be here. Not so that later, not because I must earn a living, just be here. That moment isn't in a 5-year plan, not rated by KPIs, not needing social media posts. It's yours, and only yours. Now, scale that moment to a whole society. A society that no longer uses clocks to measure human value. A society where schools teach kids to watch clouds instead of competing for grades. A society where occupation isn't a business card, but how you choose to express joy. A baker bakes because he loves the smell of rising dough. A storyteller tells because she loves kids' eyes lighting up. No one asks, "What's your salary?" But, does it make you come alive? Sounds fanciful? Actually, we have all the tools to make it real today. Automated agriculture can feed 8 billion with land smaller than a province. Solar, wind, geothermal can provide unlimited power without bills. 3D printers can create homes, clothes, tools in hours. The problem isn't scarcity, but distribution. And distribution is stuck in the money maze. Money is no longer a medium of exchange. It's become the end. We work for money, use money to buy time, then work to make up lost time. The perfect circle of madness. Break the circle with a simple idea. Universal credit tied to real output. Everyone gets enough credit to live comfortably. Not to be rich, but to be free. This credit doesn't accumulate. No interest, no debt. It's created corresponding to actual goods and services society produces. Want bread? Yes. Want a house? Yes. Want to learn painting? Yes. No one has to earn it by selling 8 hours of life daily. Work becomes choice, not obligation. An engineer might spend 3 months on clean energy research, then 6 months fishing. A teacher might teach in winter, wander admiring flowers in summer. No one gets fired for inefficiency. Efficiency is measured by joy, not profit. But for this to happen, we must abandon 2 great illusions. 1, the future is where we'll live. 2, money is the measure of value. The first illusion we've discussed much. The future is the carrot on the stick. When you get there, it's past, and you need a new carrot. The second is subtler. We believe a piece of paper, a screen number, has power to decide who eats, who sleeps, who lives. But money is just collective belief. If the world agrees a seashell is money, it is. If the world agrees universal credit is fair, it will be. The problem isn't technical. It's that we haven't dared to believe. Try a thought experiment. Suppose tomorrow all money vanishes. No dollars, euros, yen. Only goods. Rice, cloth, houses, cars. What do? You barter. I give you a sack of rice. You give me a meter of cloth. I fix your roof. You teach my kid math. We'd quickly realize value lies in actions, not symbols. Money is just simplifying exchange at scale. But when scale distorts reality, when someone starves beside a granary because no money, it's no longer a tool, but chains. Technology can replace those chains with direct exchange. Blockchain, AI, IoT sensors can track real output and distribute credit instantly. No central banks, no governments taxing. Everyone has a digital wallet tied to basic needs. Want more? Create value, not by working hard, but by doing what you love. A good song, a joke, a beautiful garden, all value. AI calculates and distributes. No one richer from hoarding, no one poorer from laziness. Wealth becomes ability to enjoy, not to own. In that world, retirement ceases to exist because no one works waiting to retire. Kids don't learn for jobs, but to understand the world. Elders aren't shoved into nursing homes, but invited to tell stories under trees. Artists don't starve because market doesn't need. Scientists don't beg grants to prove economic benefit. Everyone does because that's how they breathe. And when we no longer run, we'll discover a secret. Time isn't a resource, but space to live. Each moment is a small universe. Watching dew on a leaf isn't entertainment. It's meditation. Hearing music isn't pastime. It's communion with the infinite. Eating a meal isn't fueling. It's a ritual thanking earth and sky. When you live like that, you don't need rest because you've never worked in the old sense. You just are. Finally, return to the wild garden. The butterfly still lands on the flower. Clouds still drift. You sit there, no reason, no purpose. And in that moment, you realize this isn't a break between tasks. This is humanity's real work, presence. All the gradius, all the promises, all the carrots.
Have you noticed how rare it has become to find someone who truly thinks? I don't mean someone who merely reacts, repeats, or argues. I mean someone who pauses, reflects, and sees. It seems as though the modern world has become a theater of noise, where the loudest voices echo endlessly and the quietest truths go unnoticed. Thinking that subtle and beautiful dance of the mind has been replaced by something mechanical, something hurried, something hollow. And in that silence between all the noise, something essential to our humanity is vanishing. If you observe carefully, you'll see that thinking is no longer rewarded. What is rewarded instead is speed, agreement, conformity. A mind that questions is seen as inconvenient, even dangerous. We are surrounded by machines that feed us information faster than we can process it, yet slower than we can understand it. Every headline, every post, every flicker of a notification calls to us like a siren, pulling our attention outward, scattering it in 1,000 directions. The tragedy is not that we have access to too little information, but that we have too much of it and too little wisdom to discern. The mind, which was once the explorer of mysteries, now behaves like a sponge, absorbing endlessly without digesting. We mistake opinions for insight, repetition for truth, and noise for knowledge. And slowly, the most extraordinary gift we possess, the ability to think freely, dulls into passive obedience. This, I believe, is one of the great tragedies of modern civilization. Not that people are uneducated, but that they are unthinking. We have trained entire generations not to ask questions, but to seek answers that already fit their comfort. The school teaches you to remember, not to understand. The media teaches you to react, not to reflect. The world teaches you to belong, not to awaken. And so, critical thinking becomes an act of rebellion. Why is this happening? Because to think deeply is to become uncertain. To see clearly is to become uncomfortable. True thought requires stillness, courage, and above all, humility. It is far easier to follow the crowd than to stand alone with your own doubt. The masses have discovered that certainty feels safer than curiosity, and so they cling to their beliefs like children clutching toys, afraid of the dark without them. Yet the irony is that this comfort enslaves. When you no longer think, you no longer see. And when you no longer see, you no longer live consciously. You drift through existence like a leaf on a river, moved by currents you do not understand, believing you are free because you do not resist. The philosopher Noam Chomsky once warned that society manufactures consent. I think it goes even deeper than that. Society manufactures identity. It tells you what to care about, what to fear, what to believe, what to hate, and even what to love. It builds your opinions before you ever have the chance to form them. And so, what you call thinking becomes a mere reflection of programming. The world whispers its script into your mind, and you, unknowingly, become its voice.
This, my friend, is collective stupidity, not stupidity in the sense of low intelligence, but in the sense of a mind that has ceased to function as its own. A collective sleep, a trance. Observe how people consume information today. A headline flashes, an image provokes, and the mind leaps to judgment. There is no pause, no distance, no reflection. Reaction has replaced reason. Emotion has replaced evidence. Outrage has become the new form of participation. But thinking, real thinking, is not reactive. It is contemplative. It begins not with an opinion, but with a question. And questions, in the modern world, make people uneasy. Why? Because a question opens space, and in that space, illusions begin to tremble. The world, in its current form, does not want you to think. Thinking people are difficult to control. They question the game instead of playing it. They see through illusions, and illusions are the lifeblood of social order. The system thrives on your attention, your reaction, your distraction. It cannot thrive on your awareness. That is why, in the age of information, ignorance has become profitable. The algorithms that guide your attention are not designed to show you truth. They are designed to show you what keeps you engaged. Outrage keeps you scrolling. Agreement keeps you comfortable. Division keeps you online. And all the while, your mind is being fed not with nourishment, but with noise. The philosopher Marshall McLuhan once said, "The medium is the message." What he meant is that the way information is delivered shapes the very structure of our thought. And what are the dominant mediums today? Short clips, quick headlines, emotional bursts. A world of fragments, designed for speed, not depth. A world where we are trained to consume feelings, not ideas. And when a mind is trained for fragments, it forgets how to see the whole. Notice how difficult it has become to read a full paragraph without glancing at your phone. Notice how quickly your mind seeks stimulation when faced with silence. This restlessness, this inability to be still, is not natural, it is learned. The mind has been conditioned to seek constant novelty. But true understanding, like a deep river, requires stillness. It cannot be found in the noise. Thinking demands patience. Reflection demands silence. But the modern world fears both. It fills every quiet space with sound, every moment of waiting with distraction, every uncertainty with instant answers. And so we lose the sacred art of being alone with our own minds. When I was a child, I would spend hours watching the movement of water, how it flowed effortlessly around stones, how it reflected the sky. It taught me that truth is not something you force. It arises naturally in stillness. The more you chase it, the more it hides. The more you relax into it, the more it reveals itself. Thought, too, is like that. The deeper truths of life cannot be forced through speed or repetition. They appear in the quiet spaces between words, in the subtle awareness that arises when you are no longer trying to be right. But that kind of awareness is rare now. The collective mind has become obsessed with being right rather than being real. People no longer listen to understand, they listen to reply. They argue not to seek truth, but to defend identity. And so conversation becomes combat, dialogue becomes theater, and thought becomes performance. This, my friend, is the tragedy of our age. We have mistaken thinking for noise. Look closely at how education contributes to this illusion. Schools teach students to repeat what has been said, not to discover what has not. The child who questions is told to stay in line. The one who memorizes earns approval. Slowly, the curiosity that was once natural in every child becomes replaced with anxiety, the fear of being wrong. And so we grow into adults who would rather be confidently mistaken than humbly uncertain.
But uncertainty is the very birthplace of truth. To think critically is to dance with uncertainty. It is to look at your own beliefs and say, perhaps I am mistaken. It is to realize that truth cannot belong to you, because truth is not a possession. It is an experience. It reveals itself only when you stop clinging to conclusions. The Buddha once said, in the end, the greatest source of suffering is clinging. We often think he meant attachment to things, but he also meant attachment to ideas. When you cling to an opinion, you close your mind to possibility. And when you close your mind, you cease to think. So we must ask, why are we so afraid of thinking? Why do we run from silence, from complexity, from the unknown? Perhaps it is because thought exposes the fragility of the ego. The moment you think deeply, you see how much of your life has been borrowed, how your beliefs are hand-me-downs, how your opinions were never truly yours. That realization can be painful. It shatters illusions, but it is also the beginning of liberation. When you see how much of your mind has been programmed by society, you begin to reclaim it. You begin to see that intelligence is not about knowing, but about seeing. The wise are not those who have more answers, but those who have fewer illusions. And so, the disappearance of critical thinking is not just a cultural crisis, it is a spiritual one. It marks the moment when humanity stopped looking inward and became fully absorbed by the surface of life. It marks the shift from depth to image, from experience to performance, from being to appearing. In this world, people no longer want to understand, they want to look like they understand. They no longer seek wisdom, they seek validation. And as long as the applause is loud enough, they never notice how quiet their inner voice has become. But even within this noise, there are still those who see. They are the quiet observers, the ones who pause before they respond, who feel the weight of words, who refuse to let the current of collective thought carry them away. They are the ones who recognize that truth cannot be shouted. It must be heard. You can be one of them. You can awaken in the middle of the noise. It begins with a simple act, one that feels almost radical in this age. Pause. Just pause. Before reacting, before judging, before believing. In that pause, something extraordinary happens. You begin to see the machinery of your own mind. You begin to recognize how your thoughts arise, how they are shaped, and how easily they can be manipulated. This awareness is the seed of freedom, because the real prison is not outside you. It is the belief that you are thinking, when in fact you are only repeating. The modern world does not need more opinions. It needs more awareness, more minds that are willing to question not only others but themselves, more souls that have the humility to admit that they do not know, and the courage to explore what lies beyond that not knowing. The loss of critical thinking is not the end of human intelligence. It is merely the darkness before a deeper light. The mind, like the sky, cannot remain clouded forever. Eventually, the storm of noise will pass, and when it does, those who have kept their silence will see clearly. Perhaps that is the true role of thinkers in this age, not to argue, not to prove, but to remind others that silence is not ignorance. It is the beginning of real thought. And so, we end this reflection where all true thinking begins with awareness. Awareness that the collective mind is asleep, awareness that most thought today is imitation, and awareness that awakening begins not with shouting at others, but with listening to yourself. Because when you begin to listen deeply, the noise of the world fades, and the music of reality begins to play again. You see, awakening the mind is not a matter of adding more information. It is not a process of collecting facts or learning to argue better than others. To think clearly is not to fill the mind, but to empty it of noise. For clarity does not arise from accumulation, but from stillness. The mind must learn to see without distortion, to rest in the space between opinions, and to discover once again
the natural intelligence that was always there beneath the surface. When you were a child, your mind was curious, open, and alive. You questioned everything, not because you wanted to be clever, but because the world was a wonder to you. But as you grew older, the world began to answer your questions before you could even ask them. Schools told you what to think, society told you what to want, and fear told you what not to say. Slowly, your curiosity was replaced with certainty, and certainty, in time, turned into pride. Yet deep within, there remains a quiet voice. It speaks not in words, but in the gentle pull of wonder. It whispers, "What if?" And in that whisper lies the possibility of rediscovering what it means to think. To think critically is not to destroy your beliefs, but to understand them. It is to look within and see that every conclusion you hold is a doorway, not a wall. The moment you see that every thought can be questioned, you are no longer its prisoner. You may ask, how can one begin to awaken this kind of mind in a world so determined to keep it asleep? The first step is awareness. Awareness that you are surrounded by noise designed to control your attention. Every headline, every debate, every moment of outrage is a hook. The world does not need your thought, it needs your reaction. When you understand this, you begin to see that your greatest rebellion is to pause. Try it. The next time you feel provoked by something you read or hear, do not respond immediately. Feel the space that opens between the stimulus and your reaction. In that space lies your freedom. That space is the birth of true thought. It is what separates the conscious human being from the automatic machine. The world moves fast, but your awareness does not have to. When you slow down, you begin to see how others are swept away by their emotions, their ideologies, their need to be right. You will feel the pull too, but you will no longer be controlled by it. To think clearly in this world requires the same qualities that meditation requires: stillness, patience, humility. For thinking, like meditation, is not about reaching conclusions, it is about seeing clearly. The conclusions come by themselves when the seeing is clear. But our society is impatient. It wants answers, not awareness. It wants noise, not nuance. That is why true thinkers are often misunderstood. They appear uncertain, hesitant, even silent. But in their silence, there is more truth than in all the noise of those who claim to know. Critical thinking, at its core, is not about being skeptical of others. It is about being honest with yourself. It begins with the recognition that your own mind can deceive you, that what feels true may not be true, that what seems right may only be familiar. When you begin to question your own certainty, the door to wisdom opens. You might think this sounds like doubt, but there is a great difference between doubt and fear. Doubt is alive, flexible, and humble. It is the beginning of discovery. Fear is rigid and defensive. It clings to beliefs as shields. The mind that doubts is open to new light. The mind that fears is trapped in its own shadow. So begin by doubting yourself, not in the sense of insecurity, but in the sense of curiosity. Ask, why do I believe what I believe? Who told me this? What would I discover if I looked beyond it? Such questions do not destroy faith, they purify it. They strip away the false until only what is real remains. When you practice this kind of inquiry, you will begin to see how much of your thinking has been borrowed. You will notice how certain phrases echo in your mind as if placed there by unseen hands. You will see how the opinions you defend most passionately often come from sources you never examined. This is not a failure, it is the beginning of awakening. To awaken is not to fight the collective stupidity of the world. It is to stop feeding it. When you refuse to engage in meaningless argument, when you stop reacting to provocation, when you choose silence over noise, you are no longer part of the machine. You become a space of clarity within it, and that clarity spreads. The world changes not because you force it, but because your awareness becomes a mirror in which others begin to see themselves. The Buddha once said that enlightenment is the end of ignorance, not the beginning of new knowledge. In the same way, clear thinking is not the acquisition of cleverness. It is the end of confusion. It is the simple realization that you do not need to know everything to see clearly. You only need to be free of illusion. But illusions are comfortable. They give us a sense of identity, a sense of belonging. That is why many people prefer to remain asleep. To think critically is to risk losing your certainty, your tribe, your image of yourself. It is to walk into the unknown with no guarantee of what you will find. Yet that is the only place truth can live. The known is safe, but the safe is dead. The unknown is alive, unpredictable, and full of discovery. It is in that unknown that the individual mind separates from the collective. Collective thinking seeks agreement. Critical thinking seeks understanding. The collective wants conformity. The awakened mind wants freedom. That is why thinkers have always been outcasts in every age. They belong to no side because truth has no side. But here lies the paradox. When you begin to think clearly, you may at first feel alone. The noise of the world will seem unbearable. You will see through manipulation, hypocrisy, fear, and you may feel like a stranger among your own kind. Yet this is not loneliness, it is clarity. And as clarity deepens, you begin to see that there are others, quiet ones, thoughtful ones, people who, like you, have chosen silence over noise. When enough of these quiet minds arise, the world begins to change. Thinking is not something you do for society, it is something you do because you love truth. When you love truth, you stop needing to win. You stop needing to be right. You no longer see others as enemies or fools. You see them as mirrors of your own humanity, lost in different dreams. You stop fighting and start understanding. And understanding is the beginning of compassion. This is why critical thinking, at its highest form, becomes spiritual. It is not just about logic, it is about liberation. When you begin to think clearly, you begin to see that your thoughts are not you. They are movements of the mind, waves on the ocean of consciousness. You can watch them come and go without being carried away. In that watching, you become free. The disappearance of critical thinking, therefore, is not merely an intellectual crisis. It is a loss of awareness. It is the collective forgetting that we are not our opinions, not our identities, not our sides. We are the awareness in which these things arise and dissolve. When you realize this, you stop defending illusions and start living truthfully. It takes courage to think in this way. It takes courage to face yourself. But that courage is the only true freedom left in this world. The moment you stop fearing your own thoughts, you stop fearing the world. The moment you stop clinging to what you know, you begin to see what you are. Perhaps you have noticed how easy it is today to lose yourself in the collective. Every scroll, every debate, every trend invites you to forget who you are. But when you begin to think again, truly think, you reclaim yourself from the tide. You begin to notice how the world pulls you into its rhythm of urgency and distraction. You see it, you smile, and you return to stillness. That is all it takes to remain free. And from that stillness, a new kind of intelligence begins to grow. Not the intelligence of analysis, but the intelligence of awareness. It does not divide the world into good and bad, right and wrong. It simply sees. And in that seeing, wisdom is born. The wise do not fight stupidity. They illuminate it. They do not argue with ignorance. They outgrow it. For the light does not need to defeat the darkness, it only needs to shine. So do not despair at the state of the world. The world has always been full of noise. What matters is whether you can remain silent within it. Not silent in the sense of speech, but silent in the mind. That is where the revolution begins. Because once you have tasted that silence,
you can never again be fooled by noise. Once you have learned to think clearly, you can never again be deceived by illusion. The world may still be chaotic, but within you there will be order. The crowd may still shout, but within you there will be calm. And when you walk through life with that calm, others will feel it. Without saying a word, you will remind them of something they have forgotten. The truth is not something shouted from rooftops, but something found in the quiet heart of awareness. That is how change begins. Not with movements, not with slogans, but with one mind that decides to see clearly. So if you ask me how to bring critical thinking back into a world that has lost it, I would say this: start by being still. Stop reacting. Stop agreeing. Stop disagreeing. Simply observe. Watch the play of ideas, the dance of opinions, the endless struggle for validation. See it for what it is, an elaborate dream. And in seeing, you awaken. You may not change the world overnight, but you will change your relationship to it. You will no longer be pulled by its madness. You will see the machinery of illusion and smile gently, knowing it cannot touch you. And in that smile, you will find peace. Critical thinking is not the rejection of the world. It is the art of seeing the world as it is, without distortion, without projection. It is the recognition that truth is not something to be owned, but something to be lived. It is the quiet intelligence that listens, reflects, and responds not from fear, but from understanding. In a time when most people are shouting, the thinker listens. In a time when most people are fighting, the thinker observes. And in that quiet observation, wisdom returns. So let the world rush, let it rage and divide and argue. You simply watch. You simply think. Because every moment you choose awareness over reaction, you make the world a little less blind. This is not an escape. It is the beginning of true participation. For the world does not need more noise, it needs more clarity. And clarity begins with you. So think, my friend, not because thinking will make you superior, but because thinking will make you free. Think not to win, but to understand. Think not to build another ideology, but to dissolve the ones that have blinded you. And when you finally see through them all, you will laugh, because you will realize that the truth was never hidden. It was simply quiet, waiting patiently beneath the noise for you to stop and listen. In that moment, the age of collective stupidity will end for you. And perhaps, through you, it may begin to end for others as well.